I'm Matt Thorson, director, co-creator of Celeste.
Yeah, I'm Noel and programmer and co-creator on Celeste.
Brilliant. Thank you. So could you talk a bit about Madeline's fundamental attributes, like her acceleration, gravity, and so on? How did you get to those numbers, and how much tweaking was involved?
A lot of it was intuitive. A lot of it was just from making a lot of platformers. You get a sense of what you want a platformer to feel like and what works. And then Madeline, specifically for the case of Celeste, there's a lot of things with balance where vertical space is really important. So we have to balance, the climbing and the jump height and the dash all together because covering vertical space is such a major part of the game.
And a lot of it's just experimentation, right? Like trying things and then getting people to play test it and seeing how it feels and watching them and seeing like, oh, that did not work as intended. So this needs to be toned down or this needs, to be better.
Yeah. And it changed a lot through development too. Yeah. Lots of little changes, even big changes.
And it, like in regards to like how the pacing feels, like when you're platforming, like when should you be stopping and when should you be like like more flowing, like the mechanics change to kind of like make that all feel better.
Yeah.
What about the dash, which is a sort of fundamental part of her character? What decisions went into getting that right for you guys?
Yeah, the dash was always kind of the like a lot of problems in Celeste can be solved in multiple ways. Like you could either dash or you could climb. And then, there's some that you can only use one or the other. You have to use both in different combinations. But the dash was always supposed to be sort of the more chaotic option where it's kind of harder to control, whereas the climb is more methodical and like you have more precise control of it. So balancing the dash, we wanted it to feel more like that. And then getting the dash has a lot of like special case stuff for, getting popped around corners and that kind of stuff that just comes with testing and iteration.
Our first version of Celeste was like the dash was much simpler. It was kind of like you dash in a direction and you move this far in a set amount of time. That's it.
Yeah.
But in the newer game, it has a lot of a lot of nuances on like when it starts, like when gravity starts kicking in again, and then like when does it move you around platforms or can you like pop around ceilings, or like when do you bonk on things and when do you not?
Yeah, and it's also cancelable in this one where it wasn't originally and stuff like that. Yeah.
What about the climbing? How do you sort of like tweak how much stamina you should give to the player? Was there a mode of Celeste where you had infinite stamina, things like that?
There's we always had the stamina system. That was always planned to be part of it because vertical space was so important. We wanted it to feel like it's your goal is to get higher up because you're climbing a mountain in most levels. So just balancing it was just a matter of finding those magic numbers, which just takes time and experimentation. And you make some levels and you find numbers that work for those levels, but then you make some other levels and you're like, oh, actually it should be this other number. And there's some like her stamina is exactly 4, like you can climb or you can jump while you're climbing, but it uses a lot of stamina. You can do exactly 4 climb jumps and that's all your stamina, for example. That's just like the number that felt right, and worked with our levels the best. And then, just sort of tweaking the numbers. It got a lot more forgiving over time.
Yeah, it was a lot more strict at the start. Like it was just kind of more hardcore. You need to be like way more precise with how much you're climbing.
Yeah.
And now like she starts flashing red, but she still has like quite a bit of like ability to keep climbing before it actually kicks in and says you're done.
There's a cool Reddit post where a player like deconstructed exactly, like they went through the code and like deconstructed exactly how it works. And I had forgotten some details. It's pretty cool to like see how they explain it. There's a lot of like little weird wrinkles about it.
Could you talk a bit about the invisible tweaks that you sort of put on Madeline that sort of help the game feel better and stop the player being frustrated, and also like why you did those?
Yeah.
Well, we wanted the game to be more about like the player's intention, like what they wanted to do, and like not down to like the frame perfect execution. more about like I'm intending to do this and I'm trying to do this and I press the buttons within like a few frames of doing this. We want to give it to them because it's more about exploring the levels and solving the puzzles and figuring out how to get the character through those things. And obviously in later levels it gets more precise, but like
yeah, there is an execution element to the game, obviously.
Oh yeah,
it's a very hard game, but yeah, you want to fudge it in the player's favor as much as possible.
Yeah.
And I think the part where in the code where the player is actually like the closer your code gets to the player, the more messy it is. Like the more like the more the less sense it makes because humans don't make sense, right? So you just have to do all these weird things. Like if you leave the ledge, you can still jump for a little bit.
Certain amount of frames.
If you press jump before you hit the ground, it just makes you jump when you hit the ground.
Because it feels bad if you like press jump like the frame before you touch the ground and you touch the ground and there's like nothing. Like you want to feel like no, I pressed the jump button. I was like right there. Yeah. It just feels like the game messed up. It feels like the game missed your input or something. Like it got eaten. And you don't want that. You want to feel like you're in control of your character and it's doing what you want it to do.
Yeah.
And then when you mess up, it's more on the player figuring out like how do I solve this problem and execute it better. Not like oh, it's one frame off and it just like the game just killed me.
Yeah, it's like working on the player's intent rather than like making it a precise simulation of like pressing buttons at the correct time.
And the cool thing too about that is like for actually like really pro players, people who get really really good at it, it does come down to those frames. Like even if you say like oh like you get 3 frames off of a ledge and you can still jump, but then for a normal player that just like it just makes the game feel better. But then for pro players who actually are trying to get through a level like super fast or like trying to execute something perfectly, then they actually get down to the frames of like, no, I have 3 extra frames, so I can use those to like get across this gap you're not supposed to get across, or like do this thing faster. Yeah. So you still get that kind of like frame perfect play that's possible, but then for casual players, it makes it a lot like just feels better.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I feel like I had another point, but I forget now.
Did you come up with the term coyote time, Matt? Was that your invention?
No, that was a player, I think, wasn't it?
I don't know, actually.
I think it was in the Pico 8 one. A player called it Coyote Time, and we were like, "That's a good name."
I've heard it used for other platforms too.
Okay. I think it comes from players. I don't think developers made that term up.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
I think that's a player term, which is cool. I think developers should take it.
Yeah, it's a good word.
Yeah.
And did you sort of come up with that sort of organically while you were developing like this game in Towerfall, or was it something you'd seen in older games or things like that?
I think I independently discovered it, sort of, because I think it was in other games, but I didn't know it was. Like, I think Coyote Time is a harder one. I think that one I probably copied from somewhere. But there's like all these little tweaks you just figure out over like years of testing platformers and seeing where people screw up, right?
Yeah, when you're watching someone play and they like, clip a corner by 1 pixel and then die, you're like, oh, well, maybe the character should like pop over a single pixel. Because it'll feel better.
Yeah, and then these little things, like when you go back and play a platformer that doesn't have them, you really notice. Yeah. Like Coyote Time, like the old Mario games don't have that. So you go back and play them and you're expecting to be able to run off the ledge and jump, and it just doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely, it's a different feel.
Could you talk a bit about your playtesting approach for the game?
Basically, just try to... Like the thing that makes the game better is the loop, right? The iteration of like, you make something, you play test it, and then you change it, and then you play test it again. And every time you go through that loop, the game gets like better and better. For the most part, it's possible to overdo it. But
you have to make calls, right? On like, when is a player just like, you don't want to carve off all the edges, so the player's just kind of like walking through it and never dying, and just having like
Yeah, it's not a brainless process, but it is like, in general, testing makes the game better. So it's basically just try to do it as much as possible and try to make that iteration as fast as possible, to the point where we would iterate during playtest sessions.
Yeah,
whenever we could.
We set it up so that we could like live update the levels. So someone would be playing a level, and then Matt would be watching them and be like, okay, this needs to change. So he'd edit it on his computer, and then we could just like live update the level, so that people could just keep playing from where they were, but with that slight, those little tweaks.
Yeah, and sometimes that works better. Like sometimes the player is kind of like by seeing the other version of the level, you've kind of like biased them.
Yeah.
So you have to get another player to play the new version. But in general, it's just a really useful tool to have.
And could you talk a bit about, you talked before about the advantages of like hard coding your character's sort of physics rather than using a built-in physics engine or anything like that?
Yeah, we just want really like precise control over down to like the pixel, right? Especially for such a low res game.
Yeah.
I mean, there are games that use physics engines and they pull it off, and like massive respect to them.
Yeah.
But for us, it just never felt right.
It really depends on the kind of game you're making too. Like Celeste doesn't have slopes. It doesn't have weird objects that like rotate and spin and throw you and stuff.
Yeah.
It's more like about the precise, like, blocks just moving around, and the math for solving that's also a lot easier. So it's just like there wasn't ever like a need to use a physics engine for like complex, shapes bouncing off each other and stuff, because we just knew precisely what we wanted, and it was,
Yeah, I mean, the way Celeste is too is like yeah, we don't have slopes. Everything's just a rectangle that never rotates, so that makes it really easy. Like the things we gain from a physics engine aren't that much in that case.
Yeah.
And then physics engines aren't perfect either. Like a lot of them aren't, deterministic, or they can't be deterministic, unless they're fixed time. Like there's all these like technical things, whereas like we wanted our game to be deterministic and simple and understandable, and like we want really precise control over the movements.
Yeah,
and we were willing to do the trade-off of everything being a simple rectangle, basically.
Yeah, like we wanted to say like, oh, when this platform launches you, you have like this many frames of grace on this specific thing, and it doesn't matter the acceleration to these objects. We can like when things launch you in Celeste, there's no like math about like, I mean, there's math involved, but there's no like physics math. It's just like, oh, this block was launching you and you're in this frame, like you get this much speed boost and stuff like that. Like it's not, it's not very like squishy. It's pretty like precise on like how it decides to resolve these kind of things.
Yeah.
And they're all hard coded just because we wanted direct control over exactly how that works. And you can do that with a physics engine, but you kind of have to fight the system more if you're like trying to be like, well, if you bounce off this, in this time period, you have to like, it's a lot more like working against the system.
For the thing we wanted to do.
For what we wanted, yeah.
Cool. And what about this sort of the process of making levels in tandem with a player character who's got these very sort of specific physics and things? How do you sort of reconcile those two different things?
Yeah, just going back and forth a lot. I mean, like we decided early on what we wanted Madeline to be able to do, but the details of like the numbers definitely changed, and then the levels also changed, in tandem with that. So yeah, you basically just like get the player character to where it feels all right. It's not perfect. You have to do testing and stuff, but you need levels to test too. So you make a bunch of levels, and then you test, and then you find out, oh, the player character has to change, and then you have to change 20 levels, and then you have to, like, I think there's not really a way to avoid that. I don't know, maybe there is, but it feels like when games are really good, it's because people went through the effort to go back and forth on that stuff, and like let different parts change other parts of the game, and let it slowly reveal what it wants to be.
And you have to, I think, you just have to be willing to throw away stuff sometimes too. Like this just, this is a cool idea, it's a cool direction, but it wasn't working. And it's not like you're throwing away like, tons of, like, you are throwing away work, but you're not, it's like progressing what the game is, because you're like learning about what the game actually is, and you're figuring things out. So even though you're throwing work away, it's like a learning experience that like ultimately makes the game better. Yeah,
it's like it's still work that goes toward completing the game, even if it doesn't manifest as content in the game, right? Yeah. It becomes part of your knowledge that you use to make the rest of the content.
Yeah.
Sweet. And what games have influenced your sort of platformer design skills?
Yeah, for games I played a lot as a kid, definitely Donkey Kong Country 2. I think when we first started Celeste, my main game I was looking at for inspiration was Mario Brothers 3. The way Mario Brothers 3 is just so, like, the way it lets you approach problems in different ways, and it's so generous with its content. Like, there's always more than you're expecting. Those are things we really wanted to explore with Celeste. Yeah, I just played a lot of platformers as a kid. And I still play them. Like I've been playing Mario Maker 2 all week. It's amazing.
Were there any like characters in particular that you sort of modeled Madeline after?
I wouldn't say there's like a character we look to try and, like copy or even, get close to.
I think, like thematically, I feel like we pulled more from like movies almost and stuff.
Yeah.
Like Ghibli films, like Spirited Away and stuff like that.
Yeah, like we were going for more of a vibe than a control style, I think. And then the vibe informed like the pacing of the gameplay and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Cool. And then so finally, are there any other sort of tips or advice you'd give to someone who was going to make their own platformer character?
Playtest a lot, I think, is like a really big thing. Just like make sure that like just make sure the moment to moment feels good, so that like when someone's just sitting there with a controller and the room could be empty but they can move their character around, make like that feel good. Like
with no goals or anything, just make sure it's fun to be that character. Like I remember playing Mario Sunshine and just running around Delfino Plaza for hours because it was just fun.
You just like can flip off stuff and all these things. Like just the player itself can do all these cool like interactive things that just feel fun, and like, oh, maybe can I get up onto that ledge? I don't know, but I can try, and like, oh, maybe flipping off this way, and
just make sure it's fun at like a very visceral level first, and then I think going back to the iteration thing, like nothing is sacred. Like if you're making levels and the player has to change, like definitely like think about it and evaluate whether it's a good change, but don't be afraid to do it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to do this twice.
No problem.
It's been very useful. I'm sure this will come up with something helpful to some people making their own platformers.
Yeah, hopefully.
No, it was fun. It was fun both times. Yeah. Sorry, our microphone was shit last time.
Okay.
I can't escape this feeling that the first time was way better.
No, this is very good. Like you honed it down. You knew what you were going to say this time. It's very good.
Yeah.